Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me for tonight's presentation on building your first nurse practitioner resume. For those of you who are not familiar with who I am Dr. Mary Catherine Arnold, and I'm the Director of Student Affairs for the online campus here at South College. Before we get started with tonight's content, I would like to just remind everyone that everyone is currently in listen-only mode. That means that should you have any questions throughout tonight's presentation, you won't be able to physically speak, but you will be able to type them into the Q&A box that's either at the top or the bottom of your screen. I'll be sure to try and answer relevant questions as we go through today's presentation, but then I'll also leave some time at the end for some additional questions and answers as well. In addition, I wanted to let you know that I am recording today's session. So even though I do encourage you to take notes as we go throughout today's presentation, if there is something that you happen to miss or you would like to return to for future reference, I will be sure to have this recording available. All you need to do in order to get access to this recording is to shoot me over an email. My contact information will be on the final slide, but send me an email letting me know that you need access to the recording and I can share that information with you. So let's go ahead and jump into tonight's content. Tonight, we're going to be covering many topics throughout the presentation. As you can see, we'll first start off with discussing the importance of building your first nurse practitioner resume and why you should have one ready to go for the conclusion of your program. We will also discuss the differences between a resume and a curriculum vitae. Since you may see many of these two terms, you would see probably either one of them as you go through your job search, and you will typically see them used interchangeably when you're applying for jobs. Despite that you'll see them used interchangeably, they are different from each other. So I want to make sure that you know the difference and you know kind of what you should be using, why you should be using it, and when you should be using it. Since your nurse practitioner resume is going to look a little bit different from your RN resume, we will also be sure to cover the different sections that you should include on your resume, their order, and why to include these areas as well. And then to get a full idea of the formatting and general flow of the resume, I have also provided you with a very generic example of a resume as well. Before we wrap everything up, we'll also be sure to cover some general topics that are going to help you with building your first nurse practitioner resume. And as I mentioned earlier, we will also be sure to conclude the presentation with any of your additional questions or concerns. So your first nurse practitioner resume is one of the most important documents that you're going to need to create once you have graduated. You will find in your job search that many employers are searching for nurse practitioners with experience. Despite that you currently do not have any experience as a nurse practitioner, your first nurse practitioner resume can bridge the gap between your RN experience and your educational background and clinical skills as a nurse practitioner. Think about the endless hours that you spent in clinicals throughout your education with South College. This is a great way to show how your experiences complement each other and will make you the ideal candidate for the nurse practitioner position. Another reason why your first nurse practitioner resume is so important is that it demonstrates your skills. Sure, you've been an RN for maybe 15 years and have 15 years of experience, but your 15 years of experience is going to be very different from 15 years of experience as a nurse practitioner. So it doesn't matter whether you're an RN or a nurse practitioner, you still need to understand the difference between being a provider, a mid-level provider versus being more of that secondary help. The experiences that you have had throughout your RN experience will differ, not only because of the units or specialties where you've worked, but also due to the types of patients that you saw and the types of organizations that you have worked in as well. And that leads us into our next bullet point, that your first nurse practitioner resume, and any resume for that matter, will help to grab the attention of the hiring manager because it will create context around your abilities. When built correctly, you're able to not only show your skills, but also demonstrate the significance that your skills and experiences will have on your future within the field. It is important to remember that your resume shows the types of workload that you are used to handling, which will literally speak volumes and help the hiring manager to see why you are the best nurse practitioner for that position. Without a strong first resume as a nurse practitioner, you won't be able to make a big impact as to what ways that you can make a difference by being selected as a new hire. And this next bullet point is another major reason why it is important to focus on building a strong first nurse practitioner resume. The job search is tough, and your resume is your first impression. Long gone are the days where you could just walk in and hand a resume to a hiring manager and be pretty much hired or offered an interview on the spot. Sure, you might be able to do that with a couple of the smaller clinics that are out there, or even within a couple of smaller physicians' offices. However, if you're looking to at all of your options, and that includes those big hospital systems, then you need to remember that your resume is the first thing that a company or a hiring manager is going to see. Typically, your resume will only be looked at for about 30 seconds or less. And in a really new and recent study, it found that recruiters and hiring managers are only taking an average of 6 seconds to look at your resume. So, thinking about that, what does that actually mean for you and the significance of your nurse practitioner resume? Well, really, what that shows is that this is your time to really shine and build the value and build your value to ensure that you do not get tossed aside or tossed immediately in the garbage can. Now, your resume is also a marketing tool. And this is really important to keep in mind because this is not only going to be how you market yourself for current opportunities, but also for your future opportunities as well. This is what helps you to show that you are a great employee and should be considered for roles even when you're not actively seeking new employment. Not only is your resume important to help you and to have you and have for you finding new employment, but if you are interested in one day becoming a preceptor, or looking to even teach or take your career in an additional new path, many individuals will ask for a resume. This means not only should you create a strong resume now, but you always want to keep it updated so that you can use it for the future as well without having to spend major time editing it and trying to remember your strengths and skills and experiences moving forward. And that, with that being said, since it is your marketing tool and you never know when someone's going to need it, generally speaking, moving forward, you want to try and take a time out of your schedule about once a quarter to update that resume. If you're doing it once a quarter, you're going to remember any new projects, any new achievements and accomplishments that you received or that you were able to achieve without being and feeling overwhelmed or overburdened whenever it does come time that you do need that new resume. Now, before we jump into the actual review of your resume, one of the items that I would like to cover with you is the difference between a resume and a CV. It is a common misconception that a resume and a CV are the same thing and that they're interchangeable or that anyone can use a CV. Although some companies and employers may use the two terms interchangeably, I want you to know that they are two very different documents. If you aren't sure about which one is right for you, you may want to ask yourself the following questions. Do you or have you, one, worked in the last 5 years in teaching or academia? Two, do you or have you published anything recently in your field of study? And three, have you focused at least 5 years out of the last 10 in working in research? If you can't answer yes to a single one of these, then you know for sure that you're avoiding a CV and you're sticking with a resume. As you can see, here's a chart of some of the major differences that you are going to see within both of those two documents. So let's take a look at the CV first. CVs include information on one's academic background, including teaching, like your teaching experience, your degrees, your research, awards, publications, presentations, and other achievements. The education for a CV, your education section is always going to be at the top for the CV. For it to truly be a CV, a list of publications, presentations, teaching experience, along with honor and grants are all going to be listed on your CV. And then on your CV, you can also go as far back that is relevant to the position when listing your experiences and publications. And in addition, your references will be included on this document. Now, that's very different from a resume because a resume provides a summary of your education, work history, credentials, and other accomplishments and skills relevant to the desired position. A resume should be as concise as possible. Typically speaking, a resume is going to be about 1 page long, although sometimes it can be as long as 2 pages. I'll be honest, most times with my new nurse practitioner starting off, your resume is going to be about 2 pages because you're adding in some additional clinical pieces, some other things to help trick those applicant tracking systems in order to be considered for that position. Oftentimes, when we're looking at the difference between a resume and a CV, you're going to see that your resumes include bulleted lists to keep information concise and easier to read. On a resume, you will list relevant education only. So for example, let's say you achieved an associate's degree in nursing or an associate of science in nursing, and you just recently finished your master's degree. You do not need to include that associate's degree on your resume at this point in time. It's considered outdated and not really crucial or pertinent to becoming a successful nurse practitioner. Especially once you get to that master's level, it's already assumed that you would have already received your associate's degree and that you've already received and obtained a bachelor's degree. Now, with your resume, an employer also wants to see if the tasks that you have completed in your past positions align with the current opening. So listing your skills and experiences are essential information for a resume where they aren't necessarily crucial or critical in the CV, because your CV is your lifelong work. Your CV is a history of everything that you've done in your profession and your career, where resume is that snapshot of what you've done. Now, like I said before, resumes should typically be about 1 page in length. And the way that you're going to get there is that you're only including 10 years of experience or the last 3 positions, whatever comes first. Again, this is going to change a little bit with your very first nurse practitioner resume, but looking down the road, once you've had a lot of years of experience as a nurse practitioner, you're probably going to revert back to that 1-page model. Maybe 2 pages, depending on how you work up the ladder, how many positions you have. But generally speaking, you're going to kind of limit it to that 10 years of experience, last 3 positions, or whatever is going to come first to make it that 1 page. And then your references should be brought on a separate sheet of paper in the same font with the same header with you to an interview, and provided and be available should someone ask for it. So you might also find that, when it comes to references, when you apply at a hospital, that they will be asking for you to submit it at that point in time. But either way, when you're talking about moving forward, just know that your references should never be included and assumed that it's going to be a part of your resume, whereas the CV that is a built-in section. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense between a resume and a CV. But one of the best things about this presentation is that we really want to break it down so that way now you feel comfortable with building your first nurse practitioner resume. And one of the best parts about building a strong first nurse practitioner resume is that even though your resumes should all include the same content, your resume is going to look very different from your peer to the left of you and your peer to the right of you, because it's going to be about you and your experiences. So let's take a look at the sections of a resume that you should have. The first section that should be on your resume is going to be your header. There are a couple of main items to be sure that you are including in your header. The first thing that you want to do is you want to remember to include your name. I know it sounds kind of silly, but you always want to make sure that your name is on your resume. It's in a little bit bigger font than the rest of the content of your resume, just so it stands out. When you're talking about your name, you also want to consider the name that you're using. So there was actually a recent study, and I don't remember who did it, but the recent study found that individuals who applied for positions with shorter names ended up having a higher earning potential. I don't know if you guys realize how long my name is. So for me personally, that might be something where I might want to utilize my nickname. Feel free on your resume to utilize a nickname. If you should choose to utilize a nickname, just make sure that it's still formal and professional sounding. So either is acceptable, either your full name or your nickname is completely acceptable as long as it's appropriate. For instance, if people refer to you as Teeny because you grew up and you've always had a petite stature, you're not going to want to utilize that nickname. You want to stick with your full and formal name. But if your name was Christine, and that's why they were calling you Teeny, then you still want to try and either use Christine, Christy, whatever it may be. Be sure that once you have included your name, that you are also including the proper and appropriate credentials afterwards. So what does this actually look like for you? So as a new nurse practitioner, even though once you finish your classes, you're still not going to necessarily be considered a nurse practitioner. So the credentials behind your name are going to evolve over the first couple of months of you graduating, just because there are certain things that you can and certain things that you cannot include right away. But ultimately, here is going to be the order of how your credentials need to appear. And this is the professional and appropriate way that your credentials appear. So regardless of where you are in the process, your credentials should always list and be listed in the order of what's hardest to take away from you, all the way through the easiest for it to be taken away from you and to expire. So this means that it will always go your degree, so your highest level of your education, so just the highest degree. So once you finish with your master's degree, you would only want to put MSN. You wouldn't want to put MSN or BSN. But if you're starting to build your first nurse practitioner resume now while you're a student and you still haven't completed that master's degree, it's just going to list BSN right now. After your degree, you always want to include your state licensure status / the title. So the license, before you've taken the certification exam and gotten your nurse practitioner or your APRN license from your state board of nursing, it's going to list RN. But once you've taken your boards, gotten your, applied for your license and have been issued a license number as a APRN or a nurse practitioner, at that point in time, that's when you can throw APRN behind your name. After your licensure and status, it's going to follow your certification classification. So this is going to differ depending on which exam you take. You have two options as a nurse practitioner student and graduate to decide which way that you want to go in order to get your certification. You can either choose to get your certification through the AANP, so the American Association of Nurse Practitioners, or the ANCC, so the American Nursing Credentialing Center. Doesn't matter which one you go and you get your certification through. But the most important thing to notice and to recognize is that it is going to change what credentials go behind your name for your certifications. So what that means is that is going to be FNP-C for anyone who takes the AANP, or FNP-BC for anyone who takes the ANCC. So it's saying the FNP stands for Family Nurse Practitioner -certified for the AANP. For the ANCC, it stands for Family Nurse Practitioner -board certified. Again, it doesn't really matter which one you take. All you have to do is take one, pass one, and you can get your license. But you still want to make sure that you are putting the appropriate credential and certification behind your name at the very top of your resume. After you've done that, you would just want to include any additional certifications that you possess. So if you're a critical care registered nurse, you would put your CCRN after your FNP-C or FNP-BC. So it's whatever other things that you think are relevant, that are still in good standing, you would put that afterwards as well. You don't have to. The main things that you want to definitely include are your MSN and your APRN and your FNP-C or FNP-BC. But it's up to you if you want to include any additional certifications as long as they are in good standing. Now, you also want, and the reason why you want to include your credentials after your name is a very big piece of what hiring managers and recruiters will be doing right away, is that they will go ahead and they will just take a quick chance to review your resume to see if you have the necessary qualifications. If you create and you present your credentials right behind your name, immediately they know exactly what they're looking for. And when they see that you have your MSN, your ARNP, and your FNP-C, they know that you're qualified for that job. So now they're going to be reading your resume and reading the rest of your content. If you don't include your credentials after your name, you could be thrown in a maybe pile or right in the trash pile. So you want to do whatever is possible to help make sure that you're getting that consideration as a new nurse practitioner. Now, in your header, you also want to put your address. So if not the full address, you want to put a partial address. For a minimum, your header should at least include the city and state, and a lot of applicant tracking systems also prefer the zip code. Some individuals are concerned about identity theft, which only including the city, state, and zip code can help decrease that. Although this is something that you might not have to worry about, you may also want to take that extra precaution. You may, however, also want to include your full formal mailing address. And here's the reason why you might want to go this direction. So you might want to include your full formal mailing address, because although I don't see this very much in today's times, in the past, I have seen some smaller companies will either send you updates for your application in the mail, Or if they invite you into an interview, they might reimburse you for your travel expense to get to that interview. Again, it's not very common. It might become more common as you move up the ladder and as you have more years under your experience. But what that does by including your full formal mailing address on your resume, it allows that hiring manager to know and make sure that that payment or that information is going to get to the right individual at the right location. Now, there is also one exception to the rule of including your mailing address at all on your resume. And this is something that I did want to make sure that I just mentioned today. So if you plan on making a substantial relocation, this might be the one and only time that when you submit your resume that you remove your entire address. And the reason for this, and even though employers are legally not allowed to do this, you might find employers who discriminate against you based on your address for fear of either negotiating relocation reimbursement or for fear that you don't actually want this job. I know that's crazy, right? Why would we apply for a job that we weren't willing to relocate for? But it does happen. And you'd be surprised. Sometimes it happens even in organizations where they state like this is an in-person position and people think, well, maybe I can negotiate for the fact that I can do this virtually or remotely. No matter what, that would be the only time where you would want to remove your address altogether on your resume. And then you also want to include your phone number. So keep in mind, you only want to include one phone number on your resume. And this should be the main phone number that you use and that you have regularly available to you. Be sure that with this number that you have a voicemail set up on your phone or an answering machine set up on your phone, and that it also includes an appropriate message. This means that it should not be a recording of one of your kids. It should not be including anything like Bible verses, religious phrases, or ringback tones, or political stances. Whether it is your voice or an automatic option that simply just states your number, you want to make sure that it provides a formal and professional image of yourself. With that being said, make sure that your voicemail is set up and cleaned out. Because I can't tell you the number of times I will call a student and a graduate and try and get a hold of them, but I can't even leave them a message to let them know why I'm calling. And yet I know that they're currently looking for a job. Well, recruiters will pass over you if they cannot leave you a message. They will say, well, I tried that person. Let me call this next person on the list. And if that person has a voicemail, guess what? That person's probably going to want the job and going to be more communicative with that recruiter. So they don't have time to waste on you. So don't give them that option to immediately kind of quit on you. And the same thing goes with your email address. So you also want to make sure that you're including an email address on your resume. You want to make sure that you're using a professional email. This could be something as simple as your first name, last name at gmail or yahoo.com. Creativity will not get you bonus points in this in this whole entire process. It will not, and it will hurt you with making that great first impression. If you don't want to recreate a new email for your resume for you to use in all aspects of your life, it might not be a bad idea to simply create one just specifically for your job search. I understand. I get a lot of emails to my regular email, and I have a couple of emails just to kind of filter through. This one is for this professional purpose. This one's for that purpose. This one's for personal purpose. It doesn't matter, but it helps me to stay organized. So the one thing that you want to see, if you're curious about what does your final header look like, what should it look like? Here's an example on your screen. So you'll see that, I have the credentials listed. So this person, Jane Doe, did end up taking the AANP, but we can see that she passed the AANP. She has her license now. And she's already passed her master's degree. You also see the city and state. She chose not to put the zip code on. She's feeling pretty confident with the fact that she'll get past any of the applicant tracking systems. But every applicant tracking system is different. Some don't require it, some do, some just prefer it. So it's completely up to you. But you'll also see that her phone number is there. It's only one phone number. It is her primary phone number. And then her email says janedoe@gmail.com. So it talks about all those key pieces that we just went over. The next section of your resume should be a summary. So generally, you will be titling this section as a professional summary. The major difference between when you will use the term background summary versus professional summary is the number of years that you have experience in providing patient care. If you possess less than 5 years of nursing experience, you will use the title of background summary. If you have 5 or more years of experience, make sure that it reads professional summary. But you guys might be thinking, well, what exactly is a professional summary? So a professional summary, it is a grouping of about 3 to 6 fragmented statements that help you to highlight who you are as a professional and how you will add the most benefit to that organization if you're selected for that role. The key to remember is that it is not an objective. So when I say that it is not an objective, this is what I mean. This means that you're going to demonstrate your interest in a position based off of the description of that job application and the description of your background. You will not mention that you are interested in obtaining and or why you're even applying to it. Remember, an objective is a statement that focuses on your interest as a job seeker, whereas a summary statement communicates what you can bring to the table in a very targeted way. A strong professional summary will give a brief overview of your background, experiences, specializations, strengths, and skill sets. This provides you a couple of major benefits in the job search because it is a creative way for you to attract the attention of the hiring manager or recruiter, as well as increase your chances of surpassing any applicant tracking systems. So for those of you who do not know, your resume will typically go through an applicant tracking system first for its initial review. That applicant tracking system, or we like to call it ATS in the recruiting world, what that does is that scans your resume for keywords and key phrases to quote unquote qualify you for that desired position. That means that if your resume does not include the necessary keywords and phrases, you may not be considered for that role at all. It doesn't matter how qualified you are. You could be the most qualified candidate on the face of this planet. But if that applicant tracking system just doesn't see those right words or those right phrases, you're going to be thrown right in the trash and not even get to a human being for further consideration. Now, some of the words that you may find a lot in a nurse practitioner job description, to be sure to include your resume includes things like assessment, evaluations, diagnosis, and treatments. Since the professional summary is an area that is a little bit easier to edit and showcase the necessary skills and strengths, you can easily increase the number of these words and their use right there. When you're building a summary, one of the best things to remember are the types of adjectives that you're using. You want them to be very impactful words that are going to just wow that hiring manager. Things that when a hiring manager reads that, they're saying, oh my gosh, I need to hire Jane Doe. Jane Doe sounds absolutely fantastic and will do so much for my company and for what I'm looking and how I'm looking to grow my role. And that can come straight from the professional summary. Since that summary is pretty much that first thing that the hiring manager is really going to read and focus, if you can attract their attention and you can just grab them in by the face and by the eyeballs, that's going to be enough for them to really want to continue to read on through the rest of your experiences. And even though you're a new nurse practitioner, it's not going to matter to them then. Now let's go ahead and jump into the next some other tips about when you're talking about creating your professional or background summary. So some of the things that you do want to do with your professional summary is, again, utilizing and including those action words. So we want to make sure that we're grabbing the attention of the hiring manager and making sure that it demonstrates our achievements and our accomplishments. We want to be viewed as a super impressive candidate when we're applying to these positions. Be sure to mention any important details. So if you have 20 years of experience working in the emergency room as an RN, make sure that you note that. Be specific. It is important to show them just how much of an impact you can have on an organization. Now, there are some things that we want to avoid in the summary section. So some things that we want to make sure that we are not including includes things like pronouns such as I, me, my, they, his, her, ours, yours. We want to avoid all of those types of pronouns. The reason for this is that they are extra words for the brain and for the hiring manager to read. Generally speaking, the brain is just going to skip over those types of words as well as a's, thes, and ands. But we're also wanting to avoid those first person pronouns of the I, me, and my because it's your resume. So it's already assumed that all of the information that's on this resume is about you as a student, or I'm sorry, you as a professional. So it's already assumed that this is all about what you've accomplished and what you've achieved. So I don't need to know that I did this and I was successful with that. Also, be sure that although you want your professional summary to be grammatically correct, know that it is acceptable to use fragmented statements if it is going to get the point across a little bit sooner. So you'll see that this next bullet point says create full sentences, but those full sentences don't have to be a complete full sentences as long as it is a strongly built fragmented statement that creates that same concept of a full sentence. I know that sounds kind of contradictory and it's hard to really explain until you see an example, but we'll show you an example in just a minute. But be sure to avoid including any mention to the specific position of interest. And again, we should be able to determine that based off of your experiences and the rest of the content that you include, especially in that professional summary, that we know the type of position that you're applying for. Plus, it should be obvious to the hiring manager based off of that credentials in your name and the header. So let's take a look at that finalized professional summary. What does it actually look like? So your professional summary could say dedicated, compassionate, and resourceful nurse practitioner with over 10 years providing quality patient care in acute care, labor and delivery, and home health settings. Dynamic team leader with strengths in building rapport with patients, families, staff members, and key constituents of diverse backgrounds while delivering effective diagnoses, evaluations, assessments, and treatment plans. Proficient with various healthcare resources, including laboratory, diagnostic equipment, and Meditech, Allscripts, and Chart Logic. So some key things that we've pulled out here that's going to help with the applicant tracking system includes that we are telling them the types of things that we are able to really kind of deliver. So those diagnoses, evaluations, assessments, and treatment plans. We're also mentioning some key EMRs or electronic medical records, databases, things that we would use in a day-to-day basis. So if you've had exposure to multiple different platforms, and you want to make sure that you're including that, especially for those larger healthcare and hospitals, they all tend to use a couple of really leading leaders out there that's really going to help you to stand apart from the rest of the crowd. You'll also see, in order to grab the attention of the hiring manager, we're stating that I have 10 years of experience. We're stating the areas that my expertise comes from. So we're talking about acute care, labor and delivery, and home health settings. So that shows that I'm a really well-rounded and diverse candidate, that I have experience in a lot of different areas. This is really important for you to remember, especially if you have exposure in the emergency room or in any type of acute care settings, just because those help you to be exposed to a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different health conditions that would really help to make you more marketable as a nurse practitioner. Maybe you have only worked there as an RN, but when we're talking about going into that nurse practitioner position, your RN experience, even in these types of settings, that's going to help you to be successful moving forward. Now, the next section is going to be your areas of expertise. So for this section, you want to show those skills that you have become a subject matter expert on. You do not want to duplicate information that you put in your background or professional summary if at all possible. Because remember, we have a limited amount of space that we're typically working on when we're building our resume. So we want to include as many keywords as possible. Now, when you're talking about building your areas of expertise, you also want to make sure that you're emphasizing the clinical skills and the job-specific skills that make you qualified for the position. So if you're not sure what skills to include, the employer's job posting is going to be a great place to guide you on what the employers want to see in candidates. Spending a couple of minutes of decoding the job ad and then tailoring your resume to fit the job requirements is going to be key with deciding and determining what should be included in your areas of expertise. Most of the time, that information is found in the qualification section of a job posting. Now, another thing that you want to make sure that you include on your resume is that if you happen to be bilingual, you want to make sure that you're noting all the languages that you know how to speak. That can be something that, again, you can include in your professional summary, but if you don't include it in your professional summary, then you want to make sure that it's definitely in your areas of expertise. And this last bullet point is that you could also look into including some soft skills. Again, I typically try to avoid doing soft skills just because your soft skills are going to be transferable skills. And transferable skills are something that can come across in a lot of different ways. So if you're organized and your resume is very clean and you're thinking, oh, well, I want the hiring manager to know that I'm really organized and I'm attentive to details. Well, those items are going to be seen with the final production of your resume. It's also going to be seen in the way you interview. So although you can absolutely add them, it doesn't add as much value on your resume in the areas of expertise as those clinical hands-on experiences with those types of different medical technologies, medical devices, different protocols and processes and procedures that you know. So here is an example of what your areas of expertise might include. And again, yours is going to look very different from this example because it's based off of your background and your history. So I'll give you just a minute to look at that before we move on. All right, so let's go ahead and let's look forward at the next section that should be on your resume. Since you're going to have or you already have completed your master's degree, we want to put this towards the top of your resume. Once you have been working as a nurse practitioner for about 5 years, you can move it down to the bottom of your resume, unless you decide to further pursue another degree, such as a doctorate of nursing practice. If you do end up pursuing another degree, then that's going to kind of pop back up to the top of your resume until that becomes about 5 years old. For now, we want this at the top of our resume because it is going to be the most recent accomplishment of yours. It's something that many hiring managers and recruiters want to see since you do not have any previous nurse practitioner experience. So again, hiring managers and recruiters tend to want to look for candidates with at least 1 year of experience. This means that they will be looking to see that you meet those educational and training requirements of the position as well. Once you have been a nurse practitioner for a couple of years, that information, that background, that experience is going to completely overtake that education. And that's why your education will fall back down towards the bottom. Before your education section, keep in mind there are a couple of things that you want to make sure that are appearing in this section. One, you'll see that I say only include the relevant education. So do not include high school or associate's degree information. Although these can be important to demonstrate your background, they do not help to show why you're the ideal or the best hire for a nurse practitioner role. Be sure to also list everything in reverse chronological order. So that means from the things that are most current to the least current. So you're going to go from your master's degree down to your bachelor's degree. You also want to make sure that you're maintaining consistency with each education that you list on your resume. So that means however you format your first degree, you're going to format your second degree the exact same way. List the entire formal name of the degree. So for instance, I don't want to see that you have an MSN. I want to see that you have a Master of Science in Nursing. List both the month and the year that you are graduating. So if you have not yet graduated, and this is something that you're going to be graduating in the future, you want to make sure that you are putting the word anticipated in front of the month and the year. However you decide to list the month and the year on your resume is completely up to you. You can do a 2-digit month, 2-digit year. You can do a 2-digit month, 4-digit year. You could do an abbreviation of a month and the 4-digit year, or you could do the full name of the month and the 4-digit year. It's completely up to you, but however you do it in one section, you want to make sure that you're keeping that consistency throughout the entire resume. You'll also see that, again, you don't need to add your associate's degree on here. It is assumed that you needed an associate's degree in order to obtain your BSN, which was, definitely a requirement for your MSN as well. And every line on your resume needs to count. So do not list anything that isn't relevant to the next position or your desired position. While it is great to see that you completed mixology courses, those are not going to help you get that interview for that nursing job. So making sure that you're really diving in and honing in on making sure that it is specific to the position. So here on your screen, you'll see the consistency that I'm talking about. You'll see what we're expecting from you when we're telling you what to include. When we're listing, the one thing that I don't think I mentioned, when we're listing the school, make sure that we're listing the city and the state of where that school is located. So for any of my online students, we are technically through the Knoxville campus. So the Knoxville campus is our main campus. So even if you're located closer to Nashville or Atlanta, you want to make sure that you're including the Knoxville, Tennessee as the city and the state. So let's go ahead and jump on to the next section, which is your licensures and certifications. So similar to the rationale behind including your education towards the top, it's important to include your licensures and certifications near the top as well. It's important because this will help to, again, show that you immediately meet the minimum requirements of the program. In addition, you will also see that you want to include all of the licensures and certifications that you either possess or will possess by the end of becoming a fully licensed registered nurse practitioner. This means that your first licenses that you should state in this section should be your APRN license followed by your state RN license. And the reason for that is that these are the most significant pieces. In addition, you also want to make sure to add your AANP or ANCC certification exam. You also want to make sure that you're including in this section any of the other certifications that you possess, such as your basic life support, advanced cardiac life support, pediatric advanced life support, etc. All of these are really important for you to include, and making sure that you're including their expiration dates. There is a trick to how you list your expiration dates. You can either choose to list it as expires and then list the year, or list the date, or you could go ahead and you could list it as a renewal date. Renewal date does sound a little less harsh, because when you use the renewal date, it shows that you have every anticipation and every plan to renew it. It's just saying that this is when it is going to be expiring, but that you'll also be renewing it at that point in time. But your verbiage is completely up to you. I typically do use the expires date on resumes, just simply because a lot of hiring managers and recruiters, when they're looking at this section, they're already looking for, well, when is this going to expire? Part of that is, especially in your smaller organizations, they might even help you to or reimburse you for renewing those certifications. So if they know that that's when it's going to come up and that's when it's going to expire, they might know that, okay, well, if we hire Jane Doe, we need to make sure that we're putting X number amount aside to help her to renew and keep these certifications and licensures in good status. So here on your screen, you will see an example of how you can include your licenses, your licensures and certifications on your resume. This example in particular, you're going to see that this individual, Jane Doe, she passed her AANP certification exam, but she hasn't quite gotten that license issued to her yet. So with hers, we still wanted to include it on there because we didn't want her to be overlooked as a candidate, because it's just a matter of time. Once you typically get your certification exam and you pass that exam, it would take a lot to go wrong in your RN career for you not to be able to get your advanced practice registered nurse license. You would have had to do something really illegal, something that would have, completely hurt your chances of even having your RN license in good status, which would not allow you to have a nurse practitioner license. So you'll see that because it's just the amount of time of filling out the paperwork and then submitting it, and generally the time frame between passing your boards and getting your license is about a month. In that month time frame, it can be assumed that by the time that you would be hired, you'd go through the negotiation process and you would actually start, that you would have your license by that point. So for Jane Doe, that is why we put it the way we put it on her resume. This next section is what I like to consider the meat and potatoes of your resume. And this section demonstrates the number of clinical hours that you have spent and the types of accomplishments and achievements that you've earned from completing those long hours in the clinical setting. So this is all about your nurse practitioner clinical experience. This section will be very similar to your professional experience section, just like you would do with your professional experience section of including the full job titles, start and end date, or organization's name, and the description of your duties. This section is going to appear very similarly. You will want to include the practicum title instead of the job title. Instead of the dates of your practicum, I mean, you can also include the dates of your practicum, but it does tend to give a misconception to hiring managers when they're reviewing it. Because again, they're scanning your resume, they're skimming it. So if they see that you were only in this role for 2 months, it might throw some red flags up in their system and say, well, this person looks like they're a job jumper, when in reality, it was a clinical experience. So it wasn't meant to go beyond, 2 months. What it was really meant to do was to give you that number of hours. So instead of dates, you can also include the total number of hours at that rotation. For most of your rotations, you will see a minimum of 180 hours. You will also include the preceptor's name, organization, and the city and the state of the organization in the same exact manner as you would have for your education and how you will for your professional experience. Now, a lot of my students ask me, well, I don't know if I really want to include my preceptor's name, or why do I include my preceptor's name? So generally speaking, the medical world is really not that big. When we're talking about being at a mid-level provider or provider level, you're seeing that a lot of people know a lot of people in the industry. If you put the name of your preceptor on your resume, as long as that preceptor has a pretty genuine, good reputation in the medical community, you never know who might know your preceptor and who might reach out to your preceptor and say, hey, I just received this applicant. This person applied for my new nurse practitioner job. See that you precepted them. Can you give me additional feedback? As long as you've had a good experience with that preceptor and in that practicum, they're going to say good things about you. And that can just help you with the networking piece, which will help you with the actual job search. You will also see the area where you will make your greatest headway with this section is through the next bullet point that you see on the slide, where it mentions that it demonstrates your skills and experiences. So it's important that you include at least 3 bullet points to demonstrate each of your accomplishments for each of your practicum. Keep in mind the specific things that you've done or that you will do with your preceptors and what they had you learn and do. For instance, even though you learned how to provide general care in each of these rotations, the type of care that you provided in women's health is going to be extremely different from the type of care that you learned to provide in a pediatric setting. With discussing with parents and educating them on vaccinations and general growth and development is extremely different from talking about contraception and completing vaginal examinations. So you want to be able to really draw from those specific experiences and demonstrate what you've done to really accomplish that end goal and what type of value that you learned and that you were able to kind of provide back in that practicum setting. You also want each of your bullet points to be different. And that's exactly because of this fact of your rotations are supposed to be different. They're supposed to give you exposure into different realms of the world. That means that your bullet points should do more than simply list educated parents on child's growth and development. Instead, your bullet points should include this and demonstrate the reason why the education was so important and how you made an impact on the organization by providing that type of education to the parents. To help you with this, try thinking about the tasks that you completed that were measurable. What did you do that you could measure and you could see an impact that you had on the organization? And that brings me into talking about our professional experience section, because this is the last major bread and butter piece of your resume. 9 times out of 10, your professional experience is going to be the final section on your resume. One of the most important things to remember when you are creating this section is that it should also remain with the same formatting as the rest of every single section of your resume. This section is almost just as important as your nurse practitioner clinical experience section, because this section showcases your actual experience and background as an RN. Again, depending on your background and what type of position you are seeking, your RN experience may have a significant impact on the hiring process for you. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen many nurse practitioners go into specialties just simply because of the number of years of experience that they've had as an RN in a specific specialty. So just even thinking about that can really have a drastic impact on your success with the job search. You will also see that each of the listings in this section should include a couple more bullet points than what you would find in your nurse practitioner clinical experience section. So this section should provide you with about 5 to 7 bullet points for each job. Since your work experience should typically be longer than the experiences that you've seen in your clinicals, you should have more that you can talk about. And that's really the main reason why you're going to have about 5 bullet points for each of these. With each of these bullet points, you want to be mindful of the tense for each of the bullet points as well. And this is something that I didn't mention on the last slide, and I do apologize. But anytime that you're creating bullet points about these types of experiences on your resume, you want to make sure that these bullet points are listed with the proper tense. So when we're talking about tense, this goes hand in hand with being grammatically correct. So what I mean is that if the position and the clinical experience is in the past, the verbs that you use to start each bullet point should also be in the past. If it is your current position, the bullet point that you should use should be in present tense. And that's going to be the concept that you're going to use throughout the entire resume. Again, you're typically only going to see the tense thing really come up with these types of nurse practitioner clinical experience section and the professional experience section, but you still want to be mindful of that. And in addition, just as you will have created with your nurse practitioner clinical experience bullet points, each should do more than simply list the task that you completed. A strong bullet point should use a task to help demonstrate the value that you can build within the organization. You should again be highlighting any additional achievements, any major achievements and accomplishments that you earned, as well as include numbers to help you to build context around your accomplishments. Remember, numbers and percentages help you to show that you are performance oriented and performance driven. And that helps to show the organizations that you will be successful in a role as a nurse practitioner. When we're able to use these numbers in these bullet points, we're able to show hiring managers more context around the types of organizations we've worked in, the types of workloads that we've been used to handling, and the types of successes that we've had. When we're also talking about numbers, I know a lot of times my students say, well, I don't even know where to go and where to get started with this. Think about the annual goals that you've had to meet within your unit or within your roles. What are some of the things that your bosses and your managers tried to push you towards? When you're able to identify these types of pieces, you're able to kind of put some metrics around it, and you'll know, if you fell short one year in your performance review because they had a goal of you needed to do X, Y, and Z and you didn't meet it, well, you'll probably know about how short you fell, and that can help you to build that context around it. I can tell you that if you can include numbers and percentages on your resume, you're going to be kind of given the upper hand for that position. So let's go ahead and just take a quick glance at the sample resume that I've included on your screen. So you're going to see a lot of the things that we talked about. The first couple of pieces were all things that you've already received, received information on. You've already received the screenshots of these sections. But when you go down a little bit deeper into the nurse practitioner clinical experience, you're going to see those bullet points that we talked about where, like the first one in our first nurse practitioner experience says, assessed and diagnosed an average of 20 patients accurately and effectively. So when we're talking about it, we're giving a metric that we saw 20 patients total. If it's something that you're seeing 20 patients daily, then you want to make sure that you're adding daily, because that's going to help put additional context around those types of experiences. You'll also see the second bullet point says consulted with the physician assistant to ensure all prescribed medications would meet the patient needs and assist with improving patient conditions. So again, we're just driving it home saying, this is what I did. At this point in time, you wouldn't have the authority to go ahead and prescribe that drug. But what you're able to do is you're building that context to the hiring manager that says, again, I didn't work as a nurse practitioner, but these are some of the things that I have that I can add moving forward that, now that I have my license, or now that I will have my license, once I get my DEA number, my Medicare, Medicaid, these are all things I can go ahead and work forward towards because I have those skills. And you'll see, again, a couple more bullet points underneath each of the professional experiences. For this example, I only provided 4 for each of them. 4 is also okay. You would try and want to, at least for the first 1 or 2 of your experiences, depending on how recent they are, you would still want to try and provide an additional 1. But again, you can see some really kind of impactful words that are listed here. You're also going to see that every bullet point starts with an action verb, so a verb, in the proper tense. So those are all the things that we talked about. So I know we're getting low on time, so I just want to go through a couple of additional general tips and components to keep in mind with the resume. First off, a resume is a 1 to 2 page overview of your skills, experience, knowledge, and abilities. It should just be a snapshot of why you are the ideal candidate for the position. Anything longer than 2 pages, I don't want to see it, guys. I want you to figure out a way of how you want to condense that information to 2 pages. I can tell you I typically get 6-page resumes for my nurse practitioners that have the exact same job descriptions for each of their professional experiences. No, don't do that. Get rid of that. The more that you're able to force yourself to change your resume and to show the diversity of your experiences, the more likely you are to kind of keep that into a condensed format of a 1 to 2 page resume. Now, formatting is another piece that you want to think about. There is no one right way to format your resume, and I want to make sure that we know that here as we're talking about it. But there are some wrong ways to format your resume. So when you're talking about your resume formatting, you want to make sure that you are consistent throughout the entire resume. This means how you list dates in one section, you want to typically list them the same way in the others. The sample that we just looked at is one of the more preferred ways and versions for your dates to appear right justified and your content to appear left justified. Think about, whenever we read any documents, we don't really read from the center. Things aren't centered for us to read. We read left to right. So that is the same process that we're taking with the resume to, again, help that hiring manager be able to review it in a short amount of time. We also encourage you to use a plain text formatting when you're formatting your resume. So since 9 times out of 10, your resume is going to be uploaded online. If you do not use a plain text version, which means pretty much if you can't create it by typing it on your keyboard, it's not plain text. If you can't use a plain text version for your resume, you risk it uploading properly and you risk it being able to be read by the applicant tracking system. So that means things like lines, text boxes, and tables, get rid of them. Font is another big thing that we want to talk about. So when we're talking about font, you want your resume to be easy to read. And this can be in part to the font size and the font style that you choose. Font sizes should always range between 10 and 12-point font, and your font sizes should be serif fonts. So serif fonts are things with those little tails at the end of your T's and your F's and any of your other letters. So things that are good fonts to use: Times New Roman, Arial, and Garamond. There's a lot out there. I don't have a fully inclusive list, but again, just make sure that when you're creating your resume that it's easy to read and that the font size complements the font style that you're using, because some fonts appear bigger with a 10-point font and other fonts appear itty bitty with a 10-point font. So I don't want to sit there as a hiring manager or recruiter with my magnifying glass trying to read it and squinting to understand what you're saying. Bullet points, use them. Bullet points are your friend on your resume. They make your resume easy to read and comprehend. Remember, a hiring manager is taking 30 seconds or less to review your resume. If it's not easy, if they can't read and remember that information and comprehend what information you're throwing out at them, then that hiring manager is going to forget all about you as a candidate, and they're not going to view you as a very professional candidate. Sections. Your resume should be broken down and clearly labeled in identified sections. So the typical resume for a new graduate, again, we saw it on the sample, starting with your header, a summary, your education, your clinical, your licensures and certifications, your clinical experience, and your professional experience. Make sure that, again, however you format your one section, you're formatting all of your sections. Biggest tip to remember is that before you hit that submit button with your resume, you want to make sure you review it. This shows professionalism and shows that you're taking your job search seriously. Especially as a nurse practitioner, you should have good grammar and good spelling on your resume. There should not be any question for how you can communicate with your patients via face-to-face or virtually or in writing. Chances are, if you don't proofread your resume before you hit the submit button, it's going to see the garbage can. Either the applicant tracking system is going to throw it out or that hiring manager is going to throw it out. Another tip to keep in mind with creating your resume is having a balance between white space and content. So white space is something that you want to include on your resume because hiring managers might take notes about candidates directly in these areas. This allows the hiring manager to take mental breaks throughout your resume as well. So when I'm trying to process that information and that content, it allows me to get that quick mental break that I need in order to say, yep, I understand exactly what Jane Doe told me in that resume. I'm going to move on into this next section. Remember, hiring manager takes 30 seconds or less, so being able to give them those mental breaks is going to be crucial. When we're talking about margins, never go below 0.5 inch and never go above 1 inch. You also want to remember to include keywords and phrases. Again, your resume is going to be sent through an applicant tracking system typically for that initial review. Keywords and key phrases are going to help make sure that you are viewed as a qualified candidate. No references. So this is an outdated practice. I see a lot of students will either say, well, if I don't put my references on there, can I put references available upon request? No, that is outdated. Your resume should be about you, your skills, your accomplishments. If you are putting areas and if you are wasting space about references, then it's showing to me that you don't have enough content for your experience. So we want to make sure that we're including our references on a separate sheet of paper, again, with the same header as the resume. So that way we can make sure that the hiring manager can always combine them and keep track of them together very easily, but that your references are not going to define who you are as a professional. And cover letters, always pair your resume with a cover letter. If you haven't had a chance yet to watch our cover letter writing basics webinar, I definitely encourage you to do it. It will show you how to go into more specific detail about who you are, why you're the right ideal candidate, and some specificity that you'll need in order to show that you're genuinely passionate and interested in that position and that company. And then lastly, be sure that you're utilizing career services. So we are here to help you with developing all of these types of things, all of the information that you need in order to feel successful with your job search. So if you don't know who your career services representative is, please feel free to reach out to me. On the next page, you'll see my contact information. So if you need to know who you should be contacting, please don't hesitate to let me know. We are here to help you with things like your resume, cover letters, interviewing skills, networking, job searching, a bunch of different things. In addition, we also have some other free resources that are available to you, such as Optimal Resume as well. So if you have any questions about how to even start your resume, how to format it, where you can upload it for that review, definitely want to check out Optimal Resume. So now that we've gone through really talking about building your nurse practitioner resume, I hope that you have and you feel more confident about building your first one. At this point in time, I would now like to open it up for questions that you have regarding information that was provided to you. So it looks like our first question is, if I have over 10 years of experience and it is all relevant, can I still keep this on my resume? I probably wouldn't include it unless it was really relevant to your field. You can also include information that's beyond 10 years, but not include a lot of detail about that information. You can simply list, if you have 20 years of experience and you wanted to showcase all of the things that you first did when you were starting out in nursing, you can absolutely include the list of this is where I worked, this is what I did. But you don't want to necessarily include bullet points about that. Because also think about it this way. So what you did 10 years ago as an RN has probably changed a lot to what you're doing today. We have a lot of different technology that's out there that really changes and impacts what we're able to do moving forward. If I had an article that was published 15 years ago, should I include this on my resume? I think it's always a great idea to include publications. However, think about the length of time that has passed. Again, anything over 10 years is going to be less relevant. So if you have other publications as well that are more recent, then I would definitely encourage you to include it. Otherwise, I would say that, you want to make sure that it really is relevant and that it's really going to drive you home to be looked at as the most successful and the most qualified candidate for the position. This last question it looks like we have is, where should I put my achievements section? So I don't normally encourage an achievements section because, again, your resume should be all about achievements and accomplishments. However, there are times where maybe it just doesn't feel like it flows really great in our professional experience section. So if you do happen to need an achievement section on your resume, I would definitely include this at the conclusion of your resume. But again, make sure you never want to have a piece on your resume that only has one item in it. So you always want to try and make it to have, if you have one achievement or one accomplishment, you want to make sure that you are demonstrating multiple accomplishments in there. Otherwise, try and find a way to build it into the rest of your resume. Perfect. So that looks like all of the questions that we have for tonight's session. I do want to thank everyone for attending. I hope that you have found this information to be extremely beneficial. One thing I will ask is that at the conclusion of tonight's presentation, you are going to see a brief survey. If you could go ahead and complete that, it just lets us know what additional topics in that you would like to see South College, especially career services and student affairs, be able to provide to you moving forward. I hope that again you had and that you found this information extremely beneficial. If you do have any additional questions or concerns, if you need access to the recording, my contact information is on your screen. You can always email me directly through there, or you can email me from any of the reminder emails that you received. So again, thank you everyone for attending this evening, and I hope that you all had a wonderful. I hope that you all have a wonderful evening moving forward. Have a great night.